Hello everyone, and welcome back to another devlog. My name is Stimpack,
And I'm Ergo.
and in our last devlog, we talked about some new core concepts that we introduced in our survival horror game, Project Crucible. For those who don't know, Project Crucible is a survival horror game that takes place during a fictional World War. We're trapped in the trenches. The player is tasked with exploring the trench, figuring out what happened to the rest of our troops, all while maintaining vital resources for survival. At the end of our first devlog, we mentioned that the game didn't have a main menu at the time, so we went to the drawing board to brainstorm some ideas.
When we were discussing the design of the main menu, we wanted to keep it simple but dynamic. Static screens have their place, but we felt like we should approach our menu from a thematic and cinematic angle. There's a lot of dynamic menus that come to mind: The Last of Us, Signalis, and Metro Exodus to name a few. We created this train scene, which will play into the story of the game, as the backdrop for our menu. We then place different cameras around the scene, so once we press a certain button, we pan to a different camera, offering a different perspective of the menu.
But what is a game without music? While neither of us have much experience with composing music, I managed to come up with this theme while messing around, which we went ahead and used in the background. It's not the most advanced in terms of composition, but we thought it fit the scene really well. Now that we have a working main menu, how do we save and continue our progress? Back in World War I, the radio played a vital role in communication and information sharing, which allowed for more coordinated strategies and logistics. It allowed for communication between troops for coordinated artillery bombings, as well as ground-air communications, allowing for precision airstrikes. However, being newly developed technology at the time, it came with a lot of drawbacks, such as its short-range communication and its bulky size, making it harder for transporting. Not to mention, the signal could be disrupted by constant shelling in wartime conditions.
Due to these drawbacks, soldiers found their solution in an unlikely ally, the homing pigeon. These pigeons were trained for transporting key information over long distances, and while many of them wouldn't make it to their final destinations, the ones that did played a decisive role in certain battles, such as the French pigeon, Cher Ami. During one mission, Cher Ami was sent out with a distress message, which ended up saving lives of 194 soldiers of the Lost Battalion, which were under accidental friendly bombardment. Homing pigeons, unlikely heroes of the Great War, were a really unique concept that played really well into the idea of a save system, so we went to the drawing board. Saving in survival horror games is sacred. The save room is a persisting element of the genre and serves as respite amidst the tense gameplay and atmosphere, allowing the player to catch their breath. While exploring the trench, the player will be able to encounter coops with varying number of pigeons which represent the numbers of how many times the game can be saved at this location. The number of pigeons is varied each playthrough, and depending on how many there are in each location, the player will have to take into consideration when it's the best time to save their progress. This system was inspired by the ink ribbon system found in Resident Evil, but instead of having to scavenge for items around the level, the player needs to look for the pigeon coops around the level, which dictate how many times they're able to save. We think it's a unique twist on the long-standing system found across the genre. However, we talked about the second half of the game taking place in the bunker, so the pigeon coop system will only be present in the trench section of the game, while we introduce another type of saving in the bunker. While doing our research on the pigeons, we came across some other details that we might have missed when it comes to our level design. The trench design initially had long, straight corridors, which was a very unconventional way of building trenches. Armies found that if they built their trenches in straight rows, they would be putting their troops at risk of carpet bombing attacks, which would be able to take out an entire row. To combat this, they built rows in zigzag formations and had very little straight stretches so that in case that there was a carpet bombing attack, it wouldn't take out all of the troops. So I went ahead and redesigned some of the more straightforward corridors and added sharp turns and different layouts. Not only does this make sense in terms of historical context, it also allows for much more varied exploration and disorientation of the player, which is one of the core ideas of the level design.
One of the most lethal forces of wars were artillery barrages. Constant shelling was a staple of many battles and resulted in mass casualties. Not only did they take lives of soldiers, but they also deformed any terrain where the battle was taking place, turning into a hellscape of death and destruction. Artillery shelling is synonymous with the Great Wars, so we knew we had to find ways of including it into our game. While doing research for artillery shelling, I've come across an interesting fact that contradicts what most of us know about bombs dropping, and that is the whistling sound that they make. The Germans used to attach whistles to their bombs, which would create a demoralizing and terrifying sound when they started the bombing runs. What I did was I created a smoke particle that will spawn in a random location with a preceding whistle sound, followed by a camera shake, depending on how far the player is from the point of impact. I knew I wanted the artillery to hit random points of the map, so I created different zones where the shelling can occur. While we want to portray the abandoned trench atmosphere, hearing or seeing a shell drop in the distance will serve as a constant reminder to the player that they are still on an active battlefield.
Mud was also responsible for taking lives of many soldiers. After days, sometimes months of shelling and bad weather, the malformed terrain would trap many soldiers and serve as their tomb as enemy fire would finish them off as they were trying to free themselves. Not only did mud make it hard for soldiers to advance, water would fill into the trenches, and mixed with viscera from fallen comrades and bad weather exposure would cause sickness and other ailments, such as trench foot.
Taking this into consideration, we started brainstorming ways of adding another dimension to the player's traversal in the trench. We created water piles which would slow the player as well as enemies while traversing through them. This was done by creating a prefab of the water and adding a script that slows down movement when inside the trigger. Water obstacle ties into the idea that even when the soldiers were out of the enemy's sight, the trenches were no less inhospitable. I want to shout out to Hoomgoom's video, which helped me with the simple water shader. Make sure to check out her content. In our previous devlogs, we mentioned that our AI didn't pose much of a threat. They were clunky, slow, and easy to dodge. What we did was we amped up the enemy aggression. That was done by using new animations and creating two split animation layers, one for the upper body and one for the lower body. Now when the enemy starts their attack animation, they don't stop in place like before. Once in range of the player, their attack will act as the follow-through movement. On top of that, we also increase the enemy's speed, which makes them more of a threat and harder to shake off. The water obstacle also affects the enemy, just like it does the player. The enemy AI is still a work in progress, but they are a massive improvement over previous iterations. We look forward to improving as well as adding different enemy types down the line.
To combat the newly improved enemy, we introduced another shotgun that can be obtained around the trench, and that is the double-barreled shotgun. It's a classic weapon found across a myriad of games, and we felt like we wanted to introduce options for the player in their preferred playstyle. While the trench gun holds more shells, it doesn't have the range of the double barrel. There's not much more to say as its implementation isn't final, but we think it makes for a nice addition to the game. In our last devlog, I spoke a lot about keeping the environment interesting and offering different points of interest for the player to explore. The samey, maze-like look of the trenches is intentional, but there needs to be a few unique locations for the players to explore and use to orient themselves by. So I went ahead and created one point of interest that we'd seen in the last devlog, as well as some new ones.
With a working main menu and save system, we added core mechanics to our game that we wanted to go the extra step in making them more dynamic, grounded in their setting, and unique in gameplay. While we're still discussing a potential inventory system for our game and how it will tie into the gameplay loop, we revisited our enemy AI and made them more of a threat to the player, but we are still fine-tuning the AI and hoping to add different enemy types in the future. Looking at the current design of the trench, there are a few more parts of the level that need to be rearranged to be more in line with how trenches used to be designed during the Great Wars.
Thank you for watching today's devlog. We really hope you like the new changes we made to the game and would like to hear what ideas you have for the future. Our viewer feedback means a lot to us and shapes the kind of game we are making. If you'd like to keep up with development, please consider subscribing and turning on your notifications to stay up to date.
We hope to see you in the next devlog.